Ladies and gentlemen, ghosts and ghouls, welcome to the spookiest time of the year, Halloween. It's a time when the ordinary turns into the extraordinary, and the line between the living and the dead blurs. For some people, the terrors of Halloween are more than just scary movies and wicked costumes. They're real-life horrors. Today we're going to be taking a look at 3 frightening true tales that took place on Halloween. So grab your favorite potion, sit back, and enjoy the show. The Trick-or-Treat Murder. On Halloween night 1957, Los Angeles salon owner Peter Fabiano was suddenly woken up to a loud knock on the door of his house. It was 11 p.m. Surely children weren't still trick-or-treating, right? Peter, who was in bed next to his wife Betty, got up anyway and headed downstairs. He begrudgingly grabbed the bowl of candy still by the front door and opened the door to give the Halloween stragglers their delicious treats. Peter, however, would find much more of a trick than a treat. Instead of a child, he saw an adult woman standing at the door wearing a superhero mask over her eyes. He had little time for confusion as the woman quickly raised a .38 Smith & Wesson and shot him once in the chest. The gunshot jarred Peter's wife Betty and her daughter Judy awake. They ran downstairs to see what had happened, which is where they found Peter lying in a pool of blood. Betty tended to him while Judy ran to their neighbor's house, who happened to be a police officer. The only person who saw the assailant was a teenager in the neighborhood who saw the shooter flee in a car. Peter was taken to the Sun Valley Hospital where he died of his wounds. In a statement to police, Betty said that she thought the shooter was not one, but 2 people. She told them that she thought both suspects were men, with one of them pretending to be a woman. Initially, police suspected that this might have been a gang-related hit, but that suspicion was quickly dismissed as Peter had no ties to any gangs. They asked Betty if Peter had any known enemies, and she gave them one name: Joan Rabel. Joan was a photographer from Philadelphia who befriended the Fabianos when she moved to LA earlier that year. Coincidentally, that same year, Peter and Betty began having marriage problems, so Betty briefly moved in with Joan. Betty began having an affair with Joan while living with her, which Peter became suspicious of. Betty decided that she didn't want to do that anymore, so she came clean to Peter about the affair and moved back in with him. However, Betty could no longer see Joan. After Betty moved out, Joan met Goldyne Pizer, a medical receptionist. The two began an intimate relationship with one another, and Joan told Goldyne all about how heartbroken she was when Betty moved back in with Peter. She also talked about how allegedly awful of a person Peter was. Joan told Goldyne all about how she wanted to end Peter for how he treated her, so Goldyne purchased the .38 Smith & Wesson in Pasadena and told the clerk she needed it for personal protection. Then, on Halloween night, her and Joan waited outside the Fabiano residence until everyone had gone to sleep. Then that's when Goldyne walked up to the house in her superhero mask and murdered Peter. Her and Joan then attempted to get rid of the gun by putting it in a storage locker at Bullock Department Store. Unfortunately for them, however, someone left an anonymous tip about the gun being discarded there, and police were able to trace it back to Goldyne. Both her and Joan were arrested and sent to several psychiatrists for examinations to see if they were fit to stand trial. One of the doctors wrote in his examination that Goldyne genuinely thought she was doing the right thing and saving Joan from an evil person, the evil person being Peter Fabiano. Joan and Goldyne initially pled not guilty, but later changed their pleas. Goldyne pleaded insanity, but in the end, both women were found fit to stand trial and convicted of second-degree murder. They were sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Goldyne was released in 1971 and went on to work in the Professional Women's Club. She died in 1998 at the age of 83. There is no information about Joan Rabel's whereabouts after her sentencing. Betty Fabiano later sold the hair salons that her and her husband owned. She died in 1999. It is still unknown to this day if she played a part in the murder of her husband. The Egging Murder. Karl Jackson was a 21-year-old computer programmer for the multinational investment bank Morgan Stanley. On Halloween night, 1998, he took his girlfriend Darlene and her 9-year-old son to a kid's Halloween party in the Bronx. Karl didn't like Halloween, as he thought it was too dangerous since people like to use that night to get into trouble. But nonetheless, he took them to the party and they had a fun time. On the way home, however, Karl's initial suspicions about Halloween night came true. As they were driving, a group of teenagers threw eggs at his car, which broke open and got yolk all over his windshield. This angered Karl, so he got out of his car to yell at them. The argument got pretty heated, and one of the teenagers brandished a gun. Karl, thinking of the safety of himself and the passengers in his car, got back in the car at this point and drove away. Unfortunately, the gun-wielding egg thrower wasn't ready to let this confrontation end. He got into a car and chased after Karl. According to police, he caught up to Karl several blocks away from where the argument initially started and shot him in the head. Karl was pronounced dead on the scene at 11:15 p.m. The killer, 17-year-old Curtis Sterling, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. While Curtis was in prison, Karl's mother used to send him Halloween cards every year that said, "I'm glad you're still here." The Candyman. Parents are always told every Halloween to make sure you check your kid's candy to make sure it's not laced with poison. Most kids laugh this off because why would anyone want to poison children, right? Well, this warning is much more than just a myth, as it actually happened on Halloween night in 1974 in Pasadena, Texas. Ronald O'Brien, a Houston optician, volunteered to take his kids, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth, and his friend's kids trick-or-treating. Ronald and his friend Jim Bates set out with the kids while their wives stayed back at the Bates house to hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. It was raining that night, so after taking the kids down about 2 streets, they decided to head back and call it a night. While Jim and the kids tried to hurry home and get out of the rain, Ronald stayed behind the group without any of them really noticing. Several minutes later, Ronald caught back up to the group holding 5 giant Pixy sticks. He told them that some of the rich neighbors were handing out the expensive big candy and he was fortunate enough to be able to get some for them. Back then, the special giant Pixy sticks were 21 inches long. After returning home from trick-or-treating, while Ronald got his kids ready for bed, he told them they could each have one Halloween treat before going to sleep. He highly encouraged both children to eat their Pixy sticks. Elizabeth didn't want hers though and chose a different candy. Timothy didn't want one either, so he chose a sucker. Ronald reportedly told him, "You don't have time for a sucker, eat your Pixy sticks instead." Unfortunately, Timothy did as his father asked. He opened the Pixy sticks and tilted it towards his mouth, but the powder was too thick and didn't come out. Ronald then grabbed the tube, rolled it between his hands to loosen the powder, then poured all the powder down Timothy's throat himself. Timothy complained that it tasted bad, so Ronald gave him a glass of Kool-Aid. Only moments later, Timothy ran to the bathroom complaining of stomach pains, where he vomited and began having severe convulsions while foaming at the mouth. This lasted less than 30 minutes and then Timothy was dead. What no one else in the trick-or-treating group from earlier was aware of was that Ronald brought those Pixy sticks with him from the beginning. He had them tucked into his raincoat sleeves. He gave 4 of the Pixy sticks to his kids and the Bate kids, and he gave the last one to an 11-year-old he met while they were out trick-or-treating. What no one else except Ronald knew was that the sweet and sour powder usually found in the Pixy sticks was replaced with potassium cyanide, which when consumed releases a highly toxic chemical asphyxiant that interferes with the body's ability to use oxygen. In other words, it was guaranteed to kill anyone who ate it. An article published in the Indian Journal of Anesthesia later claimed that Timothy had ingested enough cyanide to kill at least 2 grown men. Fortunately, none of the other drugged Pixy sticks were consumed by any of the other children. So why did Ronald do this to his own son? Well, he was trying to take out the life insurance policy he had for both of his children. He was aware of the Halloween urban legends about strangers lacing candy with drugs and giving them to children, so he was trying to take advantage of that. He planned to pretend that a deranged neighbor gave him the laced candy. Ronald initially tried to blame one of the Bates neighbors, but that neighbor had an alibi that he was working at the Houston Hobby Airport the night of Halloween and wasn't even home. More than 200 witnesses corroborated this alibi. Ronald tried again to change his story about who gave the candy to him since his initial accusation fell through, but this led police to realize that he himself was the actual Candyman. He was arrested for the murder of his son Timothy, and on June 3, 1975, after just 46 minutes of deliberation, the jury unanimously convicted Ronald O'Brien of 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to death. On March 31st, 1984, his death sentence was carried out, and he never showed any remorse for his horrific crime. His last words were, "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. However, we as human beings do make mistakes and errors. This execution is one of those wrongs, yet doesn't mean our whole system of justice is wrong. Therefore, I would forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death." We've reached the end of our spine-tingling journey through some of Halloween's darkest events. I hope you weren't too frightened by our 3 truly terrifying tales. Remember, Halloween is a time for us to confront our fears and let our imagination run wild. In the darkness, we find light. In the fear, we discover courage. And in the masks we wear, we reveal our true selves. So, my fellow thrill seekers and pumpkin carvers, remember that every day can be Halloween if you dare to embrace the magic of the unknown. Please feel free to hit that like and subscribe button. Stay safe and happy haunting. Till next time.